Well, hi, I'm Jeff Strong. I'm creator of the Auditory Brain Stimulation Therapy Rhythmic Entrainment Intervention. And in this video, I want to talk a little bit about stimulation, progressive stimulation, how we use drumming, REI, to help with attention. Really, attention with REI is three different components. First of all, and I've talked about this before in my videos, is entrainment. And it's in our name. Entrainment is the synchronization of our brainwave patterns to the underlying pulse of the drumming. So I'll be playing with most rhythmic entrainment intervention recordings between about 8 beats per second and 12 beats per second. All REI custom recordings are at 8 beats per second, right at the transition between theta and alpha. Now, alpha is a relaxed neurological state. This is a state of consciousness where we're receptive, where we're focused, where we're kind of in the zone, where we're able to process sensory information and also be able to be present and be kind of focused on our work. It's a great state to be in. When we're really working, we're going to be synchronized to alpha. And a lot of us, and I've talked about this before in videos, if we have attention issues, a lot of times when we start focusing and we run into things that are repetitive or familiar or mundane or really just plain not interesting to us, our brains will actually slow down into the lower state of consciousness of theta. And that's when we start losing our ability to have to focus our attention. So with REI, we try to keep the brain in that alpha state. And we do that through the entrainment mechanism, but we also do it through novelty. And I've talked about this before in another video. Novelty is the unpredictability of the pattern. So we'll be playing patterns that you can't really discern what's going to happen next, and your brain becomes engaged with it, and that's where your attention then increases. So it goes to another level when we talk about the long-term aspects of what we do with REI. If I were to just take a novel, unpredictable pattern at 8 beats per second, I could keep you focused for a period of time. As a matter of fact, let me play for just a second. Around 8 beats per second, a pattern that's just kind of got a groove to it, but kind of evolves and is changing so that that you really don't know where it's going next, even though it's not terribly strange. It's fairly musical. And I'll take a very typical rhythm that I talk about a lot in my training videos, and this is going to be a 3-3-2. It's 1-2-3, 1-2-3, 1-2, 1-2-3, 1-2-3, 1-2. I'm going to use that as a basis, just so you can see that you can take a really simple pattern and just kind of keep evolving it so that it becomes unpredictable. And that will actually keep the brain engaged as it's playing and for a little while afterwards. So that's going to sound a little bit like this. So the idea here is that I took that basic pattern and just kind of grew around it, improvised around it a little bit. And just doing that will allow your brain to stay engaged as you're working. And that'll create a sustained attention as long as you have this on. And it'll last a little while afterwards. Research has shown anywhere from 2 to 6 hours, depending on the person. And that's what we do with BrainShift Radio. That's what we do with our generalized recordings like focusing rhythms. But when we're talking about creating a higher level of cognition, helping with executive function, or dealing with long-term change, we need to be looking at it a little bit differently. We need to be looking at taking patterns that are a little bit more complex. And this is where we get into an aspect of REI called specificity. And that is where you have specific rhythms that have a very particular response on the listener. And this is something I spent over 10 years researching before we even made the REI custom program available outside of its research setting. And I was looking at how different patterns and different rhythmic structures and orchestrations influenced the person's ability to stay focused, and how we could apply that to different symptom areas. And I have a video that's actually my most popular video where I talk about this rhythm in 2116 that helps with self-stimulatory behavior like this with somebody with autism. And that rhythm actually sounds like this. And that rhythm sounds like this. And I basically identified 500, 600, 700, it's probably closer to 1,000 now rhythms that are associated with different behavioral patterns, different neurological patterns, different responses. And that becomes the core of what we're doing when we're dealing with executive function, cognition, and long-term change in the ability to sustain attention. And so we have the tempo at 8 beats per second. We've got the unpredictability, but we take it another step. And what we describe this with this level is progressive stimulation, because not only do I take these specific rhythms, but now from recording to recording, we're building the ability to handle more. Basically, it's like training to lift weights or run. You add a little bit more weight or a little more distance or a little more speed each time you work, so that over the long term you develop just more capacity in general. Same idea here with the progressive stimulation of the REI recordings. And so when we're dealing with cognition, we need more complexity, we need faster rhythms. And if we're dealing with executive function, now we need that progressive stimulation, because this is executive function is a process where we have to learn basically how to manage our own brains. We have to manage the ability to see a path forward, to be able to set goals, basically, to make action steps, to be able to stay on task, to be able to follow through. These are the aspects of executive function that are real issues for people with attention problems, especially people on the ADHD spectrum like me. When I first got diagnosed, my biggest issue was not being able to control the executive function. I couldn't pre-plan. I couldn't figure out what had to be next. I couldn't prioritize because I didn't really understand what was important and what was not important. I was impulsive. I would act without thinking. These are the things that are associated with executive function, really common areas. In order to change that with the drumming, with REI, we need to progressively build the stimulation to help the brain change the way it responds in general. So when we're dealing with REI, there's a couple things we do. First of all, we help the brain get into this resourceful state of alpha, this relaxed, outwardly directed state, where we're able to really just engage, and we're able to focus on what we're working on. And then we help the brain become active and stay active through the novelty. But then we teach the brain on the long term how to make these changes for itself, by creating new neural pathways, by new patterns, by giving it progressive stimulation, so that you're basically exercising this muscle of attention. And so that's the idea with REI and cognition and executive function. I'm going to play a little bit here for you, something a little more complicated, kind of in the next step of the progressive end of the stimulation, a little bit more for cognition. And I'm going to do a little trick here. In our custom programs, the way we do it is each recording, we keep the tempo at 8 beats per second, because we want to really reinforce that low end of alpha state of consciousness, because it helps with creating a real calm state as well as that focus. And because we're adding stimulation progressively by complexity in the drumming over these period of time that you're in our program, we're able to make the long-term change. With BrainShift Radio, we do another trick, and rather than progressively building the stimulation, we vary the tempo a little bit. I speed up. I actually go as high as 12 beats per second in some of the tracks in the Brain Boost category, for instance, of BrainShift Radio, the category dealing with mental clarity and cognition and memory. So I'm going to pull from that a little bit here when I play this, rather than try to go more progressively complex in my rhythm from what I played earlier. I'm just going to go a bit faster. So sit back, get a feel for what this feels like. You should feel a real sense of mental clarity. I'm not going to play too long, maybe 2 or 3 minutes, but it'll give you a real good idea of what this feels like. And in another video, I'm going to talk about our REI custom focus program that you may or may not be interested in. But it combines all these pieces into a 6-week program. So keep an eye on that video. In the meantime, I'll play this a little bit faster. I'll probably get up to 10, maybe even 11 beats per second. You can get a sense for what this feels like. So here we go.